Maganashana and Ninoy Maganitok, Miigwach Kapija, Ekoma, Manito, Bing. Thank you guys, and welcome to the University of Winnipeg, situated on Treaty 1 territory in the heart of the Métis Nation in this land called the place where the Spirit lives, Manito Abe. So, how are you guys doing tonight? All right. Ambe Tukile. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you all, and let us please give a very, very warm University of Winnipeg welcome to Dr. Jane Goodall.
It's been an amazing journey, this life of mine. This planet has filled me with the wonder of all living things, great and small. We cannot ignore this earth that surrounds us, that feeds us, shelters us, replenishes our bodies and our souls, and stretches our imaginations, where animals, plants, air, water, all care for us. We're all interconnected. People, animals, our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. And when nature flourishes, we all flourish. I do believe in the possibility of a world where we can live in harmony with nature, but only if every one of us does our part to make that world a reality. So that when you look back over your journey, your life, you can truly say, I did make a difference.
Kuja nenoy maganito kubana kut nigo juga sha endo tem kagiwat sonega ming endo nje. The Chibai Mateo Gisa Gibas, Abache Eji Kandam, Kipisha Ekoma, University of Winnipeg, Ikono Mate Gamegong. You guys may know that I always like to begin in Anishinaabe Moen, the traditional language of this territory, the language that named this city, Winnipeg, and named this province, Manitoba Bay. And I like to do that to acknowledge the indigenous languages, such as those that also name this country, Canada. And so I begin with a traditional introduction and to welcome you here. And one of the things that we're taught to do when introducing ourselves in the Ojibwe language is to introduce ourselves by our clan relation. And so I am a member of the Lynx clan, Piju and Dootem. And I highlight that to you. Is there a Lynx out there somewhere that just applauded? Oh, there's one. Right on, sister. I'll explain why I make a point to mention the clans. So 150 years ago, 200 years ago, my ancestors wouldn't have had last names, right? We track our families through clan animals, and we inherit our clan relation from our father's side. Patrilineal, not necessarily patriarchal. So, something still very important to us to this day as Anishinaabe people. Why? Because your clan tells you who you can and cannot date. Can't date anyone from the same clan. Right? So I remember, when I was a young man meeting this young woman, she came up to me, she's like, hey, what's your clan? That's an Ojibwe pickup line. You guys can use that if you're ever stranded in Saging. She comes up to me, I say, hey, what's your clan? So I thought I was slick, right? I was like, well, actually, I'm a lynx, you know. She tells me, hey, I'm a lynx too. I said, all right, well, we'll see you later. She said, don't flatter yourself, clan brother. Oh. So all that to say that the clans are really still important to us to this day. But on a more serious, realistic level, the reason why I bring it to your attention tonight is to show how from an Indigenous perspective and from the perspective that is grounded right here in these lands, we see ourselves as related to the animals around us. And it's not a metaphor, you know, that's not symbolic. The lynx is literally my brother. The lynx is literally my sister, in the same way that those clan relatives that I meet are my sisters and brothers. And so in the Anishinaabe perspective, the Anishinaabe paradigm, we see ourselves as enmeshed in a constantly renewing relationship with everything around us. Yes, the animals, but also the plants and the lands and the lakes and the rocks and the streams, the stars above us, and everything like that. So I thought I would tell you that there is a very ancient tradition that now finds a very powerful new ally in our friend Dr. Jane Goodall, who is here to bring us some very good words tonight. So we're very proud to welcome her here to the University of Winnipeg. Aho. Show her some appreciation. Now, I know none of you guys are here to hear me speak, so I figured I'd do a little singing. On a serious level, though, like in lieu of a blessing by an elder or an opening prayer, they asked me to do a song. So I'd like to sing what's called a Thunderbird pipe song. It's a song from our tradition and pays homage to the birds that come back every summer and join us again once the thunderstorms and the rainy weather comes back to Manitoba. Something we've had quite a bit of this year. Miigwech. All right, I'm going to commit a crime against my oral tradition here and do a little bit of reading, because there are a lot of rules in effect tonight, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, we do have some good friends here from the CBC, from Ideas. Paul Kennedy is actually in the house here this evening. So we want to acknowledge him. But on a related note, to also ask that nobody make any video or audio recordings of tonight, because it is being recorded for future broadcast on CBC Radio 1. I believe the date is going to be October 7th, but stay tuned to the website to confirm that date. Also, and this one applies to me in particular, there are to be no selfies taken tonight, even in the bathroom. I want to acknowledge a few special guests that we have here with us this evening. We have the president of the University of Winnipeg and the vice chancellor, Dr. Annette Trimby. Annette's right here. Also, the MLA representing River Heights, Christine Melnick, is in attendance this evening. There she is. It's Christine. Oh. I knew that, but I was reading the thing that was mistakenly written on the notes here. We also want to give a special shout out to all of the friends of this lecture series, the Dr. Axworthy Lecture Series. Of course, Chancellor Bob Silver, Dr. Mavis and Garth Reimer, Dr. Trimby, Dr. Carlos Colorado, Sean McCoshen, and Milena Bartizovich. For sure, if your name is Wabonaquit, learn how to pronounce other people's names. That's a lesson for me to learn. And the University of Winnipeg Alumni Association. So this is, show some love. All right, so this is, of course, the second installment of the Dr. Axworthy Distinguished Lecture Series. We kicked off not too long ago with an amazing lecture / performance from Dr. Cornell West, which is very cool. At least one person was there. The whole idea behind this lecture series is a noble one, though. It is to provide high-quality, thought-provoking, intellectually stimulating public lectures to the city of Winnipeg, free of charge. And so we think that's a noble goal, and so we thank all the people who made that possible. This lecture is also part of a university course called the class Fall Institute, Humanity, Animality, and Secularity. We welcome the class, students, and professors this evening. Give us one of these. All right. One brave soul. So just to give you a look across what to expect tonight, this performance agenda will consist of a lecture, a Q&A, and then a book signing. So please, everyone, turn your cell phones and your pagers off. Actually, if you got a pager, bring it up here, and I'll take it over to the Anthropology Museum that we got on the 4th floor of Centennial Hall. Yeah. So just turn your cell phones off, please. All right. So we want to thank Dr. Axworthy, who was the president of the University of Winnipeg for a decade, presided over a period of growth for the university, and yet that period of growth also respected the Kyoto Protocol. So the expansion in the square footage of the University of Winnipeg was accomplished while still reducing greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. And so the good Dr. Axworthy is not able to be here with us this evening, but we do have a short video message from him.
Good evening, everybody. Pay my respects to President Trimby and members of the board and faculty of the university, students, and a special word of welcome to all the guests who have come to be part of this really exciting lecture. I apologize for not being with you. Sometimes this thing called shuttering just gets mixed up, and I am chairing a board meeting in Ottawa over the weekend, and therefore just could not find a way for Air Canada to get me back in time. But I know it's going to be a very exciting and stimulating couple of hours, and particular to say how much I regret not being there for the Jane Goodall and the words that she'll bring. She is one of the world's most exciting exponents of how we deal with the world of nature, and she is, I know, going to provide you with an extraordinary experience. But I know it'll be on tape, so I'll have a chance to catch up. and just say a final word of real appreciation again to Carlos and the other members of the committee who have organized this Distinguished Lecture Series. It really is the sort of fundamental essence of what a university can do, which is to bring great ideas to good audiences and have an opportunity for serious thought and debate. So congratulations once again to the organizers and to the university for hosting this, and my very best wishes to Jane Goodall and what will, I'm sure, be a time that you will never forget. Thanks very much.
All right, so at this time, I'd like to invite Andrea Tether, the CEO of the Jane Goodall Institute, up to give us some remarks.
So put yourself in my shoes right now. You follow Wab Kinew before Jane Goodall. I don't know how I got here, but we've had a wonderful day in Winnipeg. It's really been great to be in the city. We had a great tour of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and Winnipeg has been very welcoming. The reason why I usually kick it off is to let audiences in Canada know about the work that we're doing under the Jane Goodall banner in Canada. And it's really important work, and it goes on, and our inspiration comes clearly from the founder. With the support of many donors in Canada, including the Canadian government, we are currently involved in projects in Uganda and a very difficult place to work, the Democratic Republic of Congo. In both of those countries, we're doing community conservation because we completely believe that when communities thrive, chimpanzees thrive. So our work in Africa continues, and it's extremely rewarding, and we've had some great work happen there. Some of that work includes building medical clinics, restoring water sources, education projects, and sustainable livelihoods. Another project that we fund in Africa is in the Republic of Congo, and that's where the largest chimpanzee sanctuary is. And chimpanzees there number around 160 now, and they've either been orphaned because of the bushmeat trade, or they've been rescued from or confiscated from places that really they should not have been living. But in Canada, we also have some really important work. Our Roots and Shoots program and our upcoming Launch and Link program really is work that we're doing to inspire, motivate, and support youth to take action. Action that will benefit people, animals, and the environment. So essentially, we hope that they will become the next Janes. So I'm going to finish on that note so that you can experience the inspiration that is our founder, Dr. Goodall. And I think I'm turning over to Carlos at this point. Sorry. Thank you.
All right, so everyone who's involved with the lecture series knows him as Carlos, but we should really properly introduce Dr. Colorado for the benefit of everyone else here. Dr. Carlos Colorado is an associate professor and the graduate chair in the Department of Religion and Culture, rather. But he's perhaps better known on campus as one of the up-and-coming academic superstars that we're proud to celebrate here. And in his role as the organizer of this Axworthy lecture series, he's really brought sort of a new shining light onto campus that we can proudly say is an example of how the University of Winnipeg is charting the way for the role of a public university in the 21st century, right? So for everyone here who's excited to hear Dr. Goodall, this is the man that you have to thank. Let's please welcome Dr. Carlos Colorado.
Miigwech, Brother Wab, thank you. We're all very fortunate to have Wab running the show. This is the second lecture that he's been the lead, and we've been very fortunate, so let's give him a hand and show our appreciation. I will take just a few minutes to say some very quick thanks to the many people that have been involved in this lecture series to make it happen. It's been widely supported across the University of Winnipeg. I've had fantastic support from the President's office, from the event staff, Susan Reed, who's somewhere around here. She's the reason why nothing is falling apart this evening. Where is Susan Reed this evening? Apparently we don't know where Susan is. She's gone, but thanks, Susan. Thank you very much to the University of Winnipeg Foundation, Darren and Cindy especially taking a great lead to make sure that we were able to deliver this lecture and to have so many free spots. It was a little bit daunting driving with Dr. Goodall past the far side of the Recplex, seeing the lineup wrapping around, but I was very pleased to hear that everybody was able to sit down and to enjoy this lecture. So thank you to the University of Winnipeg Foundation for making that possible. And of course, to all the donors who have so generously supported this initiative. We wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. So it's my great privilege to introduce tonight's honored guest, the second speaker in the Axworthy Distinguished Lecture Series on Social Justice and the Public Good, the widely esteemed and world-renowned primatologist and conservationist, Dr. Jane Goodall. She's the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute and a United Nations Messenger of Peace. She began her landmark study of chimpanzees in Tanzania in June 1960 under the mentorship of the famed anthropologist and paleontologist, Dr. Louis Leakey. Dr. Goodall's work at the Gombe Stream Chimpanzee Reserve became foundational for future primatological research. Her findings have redefined the ways we understand the relationship between humans and animals. One of Dr. Goodall's most significant discoveries came in her first year at Gombe when she witnessed chimpanzees stripping leaves off stems to make useful tools. This enabled them to fish termites out of mounds. This and subsequent observations of the Gombe chimpanzees fashioning and using tools would force the scientific world to rethink its understanding that humans as toolmakers were radically different from all other animals. In 1977, Dr. Goodall established the Jane Goodall Institute, and today it is a global organization supporting the research at Gombe, as well as many important programs for research, education, community development, and conservation. She's deeply committed to spreading her message. She travels an average of 300 days per year, speaking about the threats facing chimpanzees and the environment more broadly. Crucially, her message focuses on the reasons that she remains hopeful and that humankind will solve the problems facing our planet. In 2002, she was appointed by the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan as a UN Messenger of Peace, and she has received many other awards, and I'll just name a few, including the Medal of Tanzania, the National Geographic Society's Hubbard Medal, and Japan's prestigious Kyoto Prize. In 2001, Dr. Goodall received the Gandhi King Award for Nonviolence, and 2 years later, in 2003, she was presented with the Franklin Institute's Benjamin Franklin Medal in Life and Science, as well as Spain's coveted Prince of Asturias Award. At a ceremony at Buckingham Palace in February 2004, she was awarded England's highest honor, Dame of the British Empire. The mandate of this lecture series, the Axworthy Lecture Series, is to bring leading thinkers and activists to campus to engage pressing issues of social justice. I'm confident, in the world of conservation, there's simply no voice as powerful as Jane's. I'm confident that we will leave tonight infected with her optimism and her exemplary sense of hope. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you for the kind remarks, Carlos. Thank you for a wonderful welcome. Thank you for introducing the whole evening, Wab. And I also need to thank the people who make it possible for me to be here, which is the Jane Goodall Institute staff who are here tonight. And first of all, I mentioned Susana Name, that's an Argentinian name, because she travels with me and gets me to places, tells me where I'm going tomorrow, because I don't know. And then there's Andrea, who you just met, from the Jane Goodall Institute in Canada, and Jen and Tara. And I know that this evening, the people have already been mentioned from the university, but there are a lot of volunteers. I've met some of them and seen their smiling faces, organizing all the people coming in, so thank you to them. And Carlos, I shall think back on Winnipeg as a place with warm welcomes. And when I stepped off the plane to arrive here yesterday in the airport, I came down the moving staircase, the escalator, and there was a big round mat, and it said, hug loves, love hugs, love hugs. And, you know, I hadn't met Carlos before, but there he was standing, and there was love hugs. So I grabbed him and said, we have to hug. So that was the first person that I met arriving in Winnipeg, and it was rather a fun welcome, wasn't it, Carlos? And if you don't believe it, we have a photo. So anyway, the next thing, I want to thank you, Wab, for the welcoming song and the drumming, because for me, this is something very important. It speaks to my soul. And for me, the indigenous drumming, it's always like the heartbeat of Mother Nature. So I do thank you for that. And I bring you in return the greeting that you would hear if you came with me to Gombe National Park and climbed up the hills in the morning. Me, Jane. The chimpanzees don't travel around in troops or groups like so many other of the monkeys and apes, but they travel sometimes alone, sometimes small family groups, sometimes groups of males patrolling their territory. Sometimes many of these scattered groups of the community join together to feed on delicious food in one part of their territory, or when there's a sexually attractive female, and some are much more sexy than others. So, you know, they're just like us, really. At any rate, this call that I just gave, the Pantoot, it's a very important call because every individual has his or her own distinctive voice. And that's why I said, this is me, Jane. So because they are scattered individuals within this community of about 50, this is important because then you know where your friends are, then you know where your family members are, and it helps them to join up and get together again. This all began for me when I think probably, I don't know, maybe when I was in the womb. I don't know, but I seem to have come out into the world with this great fascination for animals. But the other thing that was so remarkable about my childhood was my extraordinary mother. I truly think that the way she raised me and the messages that she implanted into me as a child are the reason I'm standing here now. As far as we know, we can't choose our parents. I just got lucky. And the most important thing about the relationship I had with my mother was that she supported me. And this is tremendously important for a child. When I was 1.5, she came into my room and I'd taken a whole lot of wriggly earthworms to bed with me. She said, Jane, you were looking at them as though you wondered how they could walk without legs or move without legs. Many mothers would say, oh, you've brought all this dirty earth into your bed, throw them away. She just said very quietly, if you leave them here, they'll die. They need the earth. And we took them back into the garden. When I was 4.5, I had the wonderful excitement of going for a holiday onto a farm in the country. We lived in London. So you can imagine, for an animal-loving little girl, this was absolutely magical. Cows, horses, pigs, close up, face to face. And I was given a job of helping to collect the hens' eggs. And in those days, there were no cruel battery farms. The hens pecked around in the farmyard, as hens should. And they mostly laid their eggs in these small wooden hen houses, and the nest boxes were round the edge. So I would go and open the lid of the box and put the egg, if it was there, or the eggs, into my little basket. And apparently, I don't remember this, but apparently I was asking everybody, where does the egg come out of the hen? Because I couldn't see a hole big enough. So obviously I didn't get given the right answer, and this is what I do remember. I remember seeing a hen go into her hen house and thinking she's going to lay an egg, and going crawling in after her, which of course was a big mistake. Squawks of fear, she flew out. And again, 4.5, but I remember thinking, no hen will lay an egg here. This is a frightening place. And going into an empty hen house, I think there were about 8 of them, and waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Apparently, I waited for at least 4 hours. And the family didn't know where I was. And they were getting desperate. And as it was getting dark, my mother, you can imagine how she was feeling. She sees this excited little girl rushing towards the house, all covered in straw. How many mothers would grab that child and say, how dare you go off? Where have you been? Don't you dare do that again. Don't you know how worried you've made us? But she saw my shining eyes and sat down to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And if you look back on that story with hindsight, isn't that the making of a little scientist? The curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. And all of that curiosity might have been crushed right then if I'd had a different kind of mother. So that's why I say I was lucky. She decided I would learn to read more quickly if she found books for me about animals, and she did. By the time I was, I think, 6, 7, I can't remember, but World War II began in England. My father went off to join the army. We went to live with my grandmother. We had very little money, and in war there was rationing. And I had tiny bits of pocket money, and I used to save up that money to buy second-hand books. We couldn't afford new ones, and most of the books were from libraries. The first book I really remember that made a deep impact on me was Dr. Dolittle. And some of you must have read Dr. Dolittle. Never mind the movie, but the books. And Dr. Dolittle was taught animal language by his parrot, Polynesia. Oh my goodness, did I want a parrot to teach me the language of the animals? And I pretended to my friends that I could understand the birds and the squirrels and the dogs, and they believed me. So then, when I was 10 years old, there was one second-hand bookshop that I loved. It was a little old man, rather like a gnome, and he used to get lots of books from old houses, but they were all dumped higgledy-piggledy over the floor. He didn't have an assistant, and I would spend hours in there crawling about, and the little bits of pocket money I had, I always saved up. And on this day, when I was 10 years old, I found a little book, and it was called Tarzan of the Apes. And I had just enough money to buy it, and I took it home, and I read it from cover to cover. Well, of course, I fell passionately in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what did he do? He married the wrong Jane. So I was very jealous. Of course, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan. I wasn't stupid. And it was that book that started off my dream. I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. That was my dream. I didn't want to be a scientist. And everybody at school laughed at me. How would I get to Africa? It was still thought of as the dark continent. We didn't know much about it. And it was very far away. There were no planes going back and forth. And we didn't have much money, as I've said. And I was a girl. Girls didn't have those opportunities. So Jane, get real, dream about something you can achieve. Forget this nonsense about Africa. But not my mother. She would say to me, Jane, if you really want this, you're going to have to work really hard. You're going to have to take advantage of opportunity and never give up. It's the advice I give to young people today. And it was that supportive attitude that enabled me to go on hanging on to my dream. When I left school, I didn't go to university because there wasn't any money, and you couldn't get a scholarship back then unless you were good in a foreign language, and I wasn't. So again, it was my mother. She said, well, do it. We've just got enough money for a secretarial course, and then maybe you'll get a job in Africa. So eventually, that's what happened. I was invited out to Kenya by a school friend. I left the wonderful job I had in London with documentary films and went home and worked as a waitress. And it was jolly hard work back then. And eventually, after about 4 months, I'd saved up enough money for a return fare to Kenya by boat, because that was the way you traveled back then. And so I was 23 when I waved goodbye to my family, my friends, and my country, and set out on this amazing adventure. And I wonder if you can imagine what it was like. It was so incredible to leave the grey, cold seas of England, and gradually, as we moved south, and we had to go all the way around Africa, not through the Suez Canal, because it was that stupid little war with Egypt, and the Suez Canal was closed. So we had to take an extra time and go all the way around the Cape. And so gradually the air got warmer, and I can never forget the first dolphin that I saw jumping out of the water near the boat, and then a flying fish, and the smells from the land changed, and we landed in exotic places like the Canary Islands. Of course, I remember Dr. Dolittle going to the Canary Islands, and then Cape Town and Durban and what was then, oh, never mind, other places. And we eventually got to Mombasa, and a train journey, and I got to stay with my friend. And then I got a job in Nairobi, and that's when I heard about and met the late Dr. Louis Leakey, another person who was so, so important in enabling me to do what I've done. How wise my mother was. I went to see him at the Natural History Museum, and he took me around. He asked me so many questions, but I'd followed her advice. I'd gone on learning about animals. I spent hours when I was working in London in the Natural History Museum in my lunch hours. And so I could answer many of his questions, and he straight away gave me a job as his secretary. And that enabled me to go with him, his wife, one other young English girl, and I think there were 5 Kenyans, to a place that is now very famous to anybody who knows anything about paleontology. It's Olduvai Gorge, where some very, very famous fossil finds of early man have been discovered. But back then, no human remains had been found. And if you go to Olduvai Gorge today, it's still a wonderful place, but it's nothing like what it was then. Gillian and I, after our hard day working under the hot sun, were allowed to walk out, just on our own, onto the plains. And all the animals were there back then, not just the antelopes and the dik-diks and the giraffe, but rhino and lion. We met a rhino one day, and luckily the wind was blowing from him to us. He was about as close as halfway back here, very close. But luckily he trotted off in the opposite direction. And then this lion, it was a young male, he'd never seen anything like me and Gillian before, and he followed us, curiosity like a cat, at least the length of this whole space, probably a bit longer. And it was very exciting, but it was a bit scary too. And I really believe that it was that night around the campfire that Louis Leakey decided I was the person he'd been looking for. He told me for 10 years to go and study not just any animal, but the one most like us. It took a year before my excited, immediate response, yes, yes, yes. It took a year before I could even start, because where would I get money? Where would Louis Leakey get money, rather? For a young girl, straight from England, with no degree. I mean, what an absurd idea. Finally, a wealthy American businessman said, okay, money for half a year. We'll see how she does. And then the British authorities, because back then what's Tanzania today was still Tanganyika, it was part of the crumbling British Empire. And the British authorities were absolutely not prepared to take responsibility for this crazy scheme. But in the end, because Leakey never gave up, they said, all right, but she's got to have a companion. So who volunteered? That same amazing mother. There she is. I'm now 26. She's still got that supporting role. And, you know, people say, oh, Jane, you were so brave to go off into the jungle like that. I wasn't brave. That was my dream from a child. I felt at home straight away. But the camp that we had, if you go camping today, you have a nice sewn-in ground sheet and mosquito zip net windows and so forth. But back then, all we could afford was an old second-hand army tent. And the ground sheet was a piece of canvas on the floor. And if you wanted air to come in, and we did, you rolled up the flaps and tied them with tape. So in came the air, but also the spiders, the scorpions, the snakes. And that was okay for me, but what about my poor mother? And she was left all day on her own with an African cook, and he had a predilection for alcohol. He was a brilliant cook. And all the people, all the Europeans who one by one employed him thought, this is perfect. Jane and her mother will have wonderful food. There won't be any alcohol, so everything's fine. But of course, there's a local, very alcoholic brew made from fermented bananas, which he very quickly discovered. So half the time, my mother was left with a slightly inebriated cook. But she was there, and the main thing she did was to boost my morale, because in those early days, the chimpanzees ran off whenever they saw me, because they'd never seen a white ape before. And so they just took one look and disappeared in the vegetation. And I knew if I didn't see something exciting before the money ran out, remember it was only half a year, that would be the end of the study. And it was my mother saying, but Jane, you found this peak. And from it, with your binoculars, you're learning about a lot more than you think about the chimps. You're seeing how they move in these small groups. You're seeing how they gather when there's a good food around. You're learning about the foods they eat. You're learning how they make nests at night, bending the branches over and sleeping up in the trees. You're learning about the different calls they give. So it was really sad that she left before that breakthrough observation, which you referred to, Carlos. That day when I saw the one chimp who'd begun losing his fear of me and whom I'd named David Greybeard because of his beautiful white beard. And there he was, crouched over a termite mound, and I saw this black hand reach out and pick pieces of grass stem and push them down into the mound, pull them out with termites biting on, and pick them off with his lips. And I saw him reach out and pick a leafy twig and strip off the leaves, modifying that twig, making a tool. And it was so exciting that first day I thought, when I got back, well, maybe I imagined it. And I didn't have a very good view. He wasn't that used to me, and I was looking through the vegetation. But 2 days later, I saw him and his closest companion, Goliath, and they were both fishing for termites. And that's when I sent a telegram to Louis Leakey. And he sent back his famous reply, because at that time we were defined as man, the toolmaker, was our definition. And so he said, we have to redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans. So that was brought in the National Geographic to fund the research after the half-year money ran out. And you all must have seen that now the Geographic has been sold almost entirely to Richard Murdoch. I'm shocked. I thought it was a joke when I read it. I'm very sad because I've had this long relationship with the National Geographic over the years. It was the National Geographic that not only provided money for me to stay in Gombe, but they also sent a filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, whose film took the pictures of the Gombe chimpanzees into living rooms around the world, and where a lot of scientists had discounted my descriptions of chimpanzees tool using. How could anybody believe this young girl who didn't have a degree, who just arrived from England? You really shouldn't believe what she says. But when they saw Hugo's film of chimpanzees using tools, they had to believe it. And Hugo, of course, became my first husband, and my son, our son, Grub, is the result of that. So that was the Geographic really has played this major role in my life, and I'm very sad what I hear has happened to it today. At any rate, once I got this money and I knew I could stay and I was no longer fearful, I could really settle down to learn about the chimpanzees. And what I'm going to say now is what we've learned over the years, not everything I learned straight away. But we know they are more like us than any other living creature. Today we know what we didn't know then, which is that the structure of the DNA of humans and chimpanzees differs by only just over 1%. And I'm told by the geneticists that the main difference is in the function of the genes, and that this can change with the environment. And we know today that the composition of the blood and the structure of the immune system and the anatomy of the brain is more like ours than that of any other living creature. But equally striking, and for me just as important, or even for me more so, is the similarities in behavior. Now, why did Louis Leakey want to send me to study chimpanzees and Diane and Birute to study gorillas and orangutans? Because he believed there was a common ancestor about 6 million years ago, a chimp-like, human-like creature. And so he reasoned that if I could see behavior that was similar or maybe the same in modern humans and modern chimpanzees, maybe that shared behavior had come with the two from that common ancestor 6 million years ago. And that's what he was interested in, because when he was studying early man, there's a lot you can tell from fossilized bones, but behavior doesn't fossilize. So he liked to imagine now, after hearing about what I'd learned about the chimpanzees, his early hominids behaving very much like the chimpanzees of today, because, yes, we share many of the postures and gestures of our nonverbal communication: kissing, embracing, hugging, patting one another, swaggering and shaking the fist in aggression, hurling rocks and branches, using tools. And they live in a very complex society where groups of males patrol the boundaries of the territory, and the females and young form small groups. The males protect the resources within the territory for their females and young. There are no long-lasting pair bonds between unrelated males and females. When a female is sexually receptive, she may be mated by most or even all of the males in her community. The fascination for me was that there are good and bad mothers in chimp society just as in human society. And now that we can look back over the years, it's very clear that those females who showed affectionate and protective behavior towards their offspring, but not overprotective, females who could impose discipline, mothers who above all were supportive, their offspring grew up to play a more important role in their society. The females were better mothers, the males rose to a higher position in the male dominance hierarchy, which is something very important for chimpanzees. And the males are always in juxtaposition as to who shall get to the coveted top-ranking position. The chimpanzee has a long childhood. There are 5 years during which the child is riding about on the mother's back and sleeping in her night nest with her, and suckling all the nourishment is derived from the mother's milk for the first 3 years, and after that, gradually solids become more important. And this long childhood, we believe, is important for learning, just as it is for the human child. And so the chimpanzee infant watches what goes on and imitates what he or she sees and practices what he or she sees. So we now know from other studies around Africa that in different parts of the chimpanzee range, there are different tool-using behaviors. And if we define human culture as a behavior that's passed from one generation to the next through observational learning, then chimpanzees have their own primitive cultures. The bonds between mothers and offspring are long-lasting, and chimpanzees can live to be 60 years in the wild, actually over 70 in captivity, so it's a very long life. And when I say that the bonds between mothers and offspring are so strong, let me illustrate this with one story. Let's imagine we're following a young male. He happens to be called Satan. I won't go into why, but that was when he was a kid. He did something naughty. But now he's 23 and he's in his prime, and he's very magnificent, and he's going along this trail, and suddenly he hears sounds of chimpanzees feeding in the trees ahead. They've obviously found a delicious food, and and you imagine 20 or so chimpanzees sounding like that. And he hurries along, his hair bristles with excitement. He comes to this big tree, he climbs up, and there's a lovely bunch of ripe red figs. There's a young male feeding there, but Satan's 2 years older, dominant, threatens him. The young male backs off screaming. What Satan didn't realize is that that young male's older brother, who's about 3 years older than Satan, is feeding higher up in the tree. And hearing his young brother in trouble, he comes swinging down, and now the two brothers attack Satan together, and Satan screams. To my amazement, a very ancient female who must have been at least 50, teeth worn down to the gums, hair sparse and browning, she comes down through the branches. She drops her frail little self onto these 3 battling males. With her little hands, she starts hitting the 2 brothers. And I think they were so surprised that they mildly threatened her, and Satan got away. And that was Satan's ancient mother, Sprout. So these are the kind of long-lasting bonds that we've been able to document, because we're now in our 55th year of studying those same chimpanzees. We're looking at the offspring and the granddaughters and even the great-granddaughters of the original chimpanzees that I knew so well. It was very sad to me to find that, like us, chimpanzees have a dark side to their nature, and they're capable of violence, aggression, even a kind of primitive war when the males of one community attack an individual in a neighboring community, a stranger, and very often that victim is left to die of wounds inflicted. But just like us, chimpanzees also have a loving and compassionate and true altruistic side to their nature, as when a mother died and her little 3-year-old, who was just beginning to live on solids, we thought he would die. He had no older brother or sister to adopt him, but he was adopted by a 12-year-old unrelated adolescent male who waited for him in travel, let the infant ride on his back, shared his food when Mel begged, whimpering, let little Mel curl up beside him in his nest at night, and protected him when he got into difficulties, and saved his life, no question about that. So it's very clear there is no sharp line between them and us. Yet, when I'd been in the field 1.5 years, I didn't know nearly as much as I know now, but I'd already begun to learn quite a bit about these amazing beings. And Louis Leakey sent me a letter and said, I won't always be around to get money for you. You're going to have to find your own money, and for that you're going to need a degree, and we don't have time to mess about with a BA. So you'll have to go straight for a PhD, and I've got you a place in Cambridge University. He said, you'll be doing a degree in ethology. I didn't know what that meant. No laptops, couldn't Google it. At any rate, I got there, and I was a bit nervous, can you imagine? First of all, I thought many of the students would resent me coming in the back door, and I think some of them did. You know, who does she think she is, just because she's doing this exotic chimpanzees in Africa, and she's got out of all the slogging to get a BA. But even worse was the fact that many of the professors were shocked. They told me I'd done everything wrong. They told me that the chimpanzee should have been given numbers and not names. That was the scientific way of doing things. And they told me that I could not talk about chimpanzee personality. I couldn't talk about them having minds capable of any kind of thought, and I certainly couldn't talk about them having emotions. Why? Because these were characteristics of the human animal. Fortunately, when I was a child, I had a teacher. He was with me a lot of my childhood, and he very clearly taught me that the professors were wrong. That teacher was my dog, Rusty. You can't share your life in a meaningful way with a dog, a cat, a rabbit, a horse, a cow, a bison, I don't care what it is, and not know that, of course, animals have personalities, minds, and feelings. Of course they do. And so they told me, these professors, and the scientific thinking at the time was that there was a difference in kind between us and the rest of the animals. We know today it's a difference in degree. So the chimpanzees, with Hugo's film and some of the professors coming out to see the chimpanzees, my supervisor, Robert Hind, Professor Robert Hind, any of you ethologists will know his name, was my sternest critic when I arrived, but after he'd been 2 weeks at Gombe, he said that had changed his life, and that he knew more about animal behavior now than in all his other studies on birds. So he helped me to write in such a way that I wouldn't be torn apart by my scientific colleagues. And just in case this is of interest to any of you students, let me tell you one of the lessons that I got from him early on. I'd written in my, I hadn't got a scientific education at the time, so I was very naive. Poor Robert had to put up with a lot. And I'd written about the old female Flo, and she just had another baby, and her 5-year-old daughter, Fifi, was absolutely entranced with this baby and spent time close to her mother. She was always reaching out to try and touch the baby if her mother would let her. And if any other youngster came anywhere near, Fifi's hair would bristle, and she'd wave her fist and scream and chase them away. And I said she was jealous. Robert Hind said, Jane, but you can't say that because you can't prove it. So I said, well, no, I suppose I can't, but what shall I say? Because I'm sure she was jealous. So Robert Hind said this to me. He said, I suggest that you write, Fifi behaved in such a way that had she been a human child, we would say she was jealous. Now, that is absolutely brilliant. And that's how I have expressed some of my more outrageous findings ever since. And it can't be pulled to pieces. At any rate, I think it's true that the chimpanzees have opened the door to a new kind of scientific understanding of who we are in relation to the other animals. You know, for a long time, parrot owners used to say that, or still do say, that my parrot honestly understands many of the words that he or she uses, and uses them in the right context. And scientists would say this isn't possible because the bird brain is structured differently from the mammal brain, and therefore doesn't have such cognitive abilities, until two scientists in Oxford University were studying tool-using behavior, intellectual behavior in crows, and they had a pair of crows, Caledonian crows, and they had a very simple task. They had a tube, a glass tube, with a reward at the bottom, and they were given a wire with a hook. And they found it pretty easy to put this down into the tube and pull out the reward. And then one day, the hook broke off. So there was a lot of frustrated stabbing, and then one of the birds took that piece of wire and with beak and foot bent a hook and got out the reward. Well, wow, so of course the scientists were overjoyed, they were over the moon, their bird had made a tool. But the skeptics, many of them said, well, that was just something that happened once, it was just an accident, wasn't deliberate. Oh, the next day the bird did the same, and the next day, and clearly had the hang of it and was doing this very deliberately and purposefully to get out a reward. So then the skeptic said, well, there's only one of the birds doing it. This is an aberrant bird, and you can't deduce anything from that. So why was only one of the birds getting making the tool? Because this was the female, and every time she pulled out the reward, the male took it from her. So the motto is, if you have a wife, you don't need to bother to make a tool. So that led to a whole flurry of interest in bird intelligence. And I have to tell you that I know a parrot called Nkisi who lives in New York, and he has just uttered his 1,600th word. And she only counts a word as part of his vocabulary if he has said it in the correct context, unprompted, at least twice. And this bird is amazing, absolutely amazing. She had an iguana, and very fond of the iguana, and the iguana died. And she's very spiritual, she's not a scientist. So she was burning sweetgrass, and she had candles lit, and she was crying, and the lizard was laid out in the ground, and there was a little box, it was going to be a burial. And Nkisi was at the age of 8 when he had lots of toys to help him learn more words, so that you press a button and it says A is for apple. You know those kind of things that you buy for your children? And so he came over and looked at what was going on, and after a bit he said, try a new battery. The latest flurry of interest is the intelligence of the octopus. Okay, the bird brain is structured differently from the mammalian brain. The octopus doesn't even have a brain, it has a central nervous system. But some of you may know of some of the extraordinary ways that octopus can open puzzle boxes and things. But if you haven't seen it, I beg of you, Google octopus with coconut shells. That's all you need to do. And what you will see, you know, the octopus has 4 tentacles on each side, and you will see this octopus under the water being studied, actually by a zoologist who said he nearly died of laughing because he nearly drowned. You can't laugh, you shouldn't laugh when you're under the water. And he's filming this, and this octopus is going to an area where there are no rocks or seaweed or anything, so it's just bare, the poor octopus will be very unprotected. So on each side, 2 of the tentacles are clasping a half coconut shell, empty coconut shell, and it's walking along on tiptoe on the other 2 tentacles on each side, gets to this area where for some reason, I say he, I don't know, wants to go, puts half the coconut on the ground, oozes itself, you know how amazingly they go in tiny spaces, into the half coconut shell, and with 2 of the tentacles puts the other half on the top. Google it and see, it's real, it actually happened. It's made a tool. At any rate, we now, I think for any of you young people who are interested in studying animal behavior, wow, you have the field is open. And there are so many things being discovered now that people are prepared to admit that animals can do things that at one time we were told they couldn't do. The whole world is open. There's so much to discover. Wow. And all the time we're learning more and more how jolly arrogant we've been. And this is where we can learn from the indigenous people. This is where the indigenous people never had that arrogance of thinking that we were so utterly supreme, so totally different, but that we are merely part of the animal kingdom and have a, therefore, very responsible role to play. So to go back, I got my PhD, I went back to the field, I was having this idyllic life. It was better than anything I dreamed of. I built up a research station, I had a child, I had time to analyze data, which I love. I could write papers, I could write a couple of books. I mean, it was paradise. So why did I leave? I left because in '86 I went to a conference where for the first time we brought together all the people studying chimpanzees across Africa and a few people studying non-invasive chimps in captivity, like in a zoo or something. And we had one session on conservation right across Africa, where by then there were about 8 different studies. The same picture. The forests were being cut down, chimpanzee numbers were plummeting, the beginning of the bushmeat trade. It was awful. And there was a session on conditions in some captive situations. And I will never forget seeing secretly filmed footage of our closest living relatives in 5-foot by 5-foot cages, completely bare, there because their bodies are so like ours that the scientists felt these would be perfect guinea pigs to learn about human cures for human diseases, vaccines, and so forth, because chimpanzees are so like us they can be infected with diseases which other animals cannot be infected with. Just because chimpanzees are so like us, scientists who are not prepared to think about, consider, admit the equally striking similarities in psychology and behavior and emotion. And I knew I had to do something. I went to that conference as a scientist, planning to carry on with my idyllic life, and I left as an activist. And I haven't been more than 3 weeks in any one place since October 1986. Looking back on it, what on earth did I think I could do? But I did it anyway. We got some very large enlargements of photographs, made a sort of exhibit. I trundled myself around Africa. I was on my own with a whole lot of different tools that I'd collected up from various study sites, showing the different cultural traditions in the chimpanzee societies, photographs illustrating their behavior and their human-like behavior. And I took it around to as many of the chimpanzee range states as I could, and started wildlife awareness weeks, many of which are still going on to this day. And as I was traveling around in Africa, I was beginning to understand a lot more, not only about what's happening to the chimpanzees, but the problems facing the African people. I was seeing the extent in so many places, particularly around chimpanzee habitats in wilderness areas, the extreme poverty, the lack of education, the disease, leading to a lot of ethnic violence. And I began to realize that not all of this, but certainly a good deal of it, stemmed back from the old colonial days when people went from other countries and just took and took and took Africa's natural resources, including human resources, including slaves. And I realized that to some extent, some of the big multinational corporations are doing the same today. So I shouldn't just stay in Africa trying to talk to the African people about the plight of the chimpanzees. I needed to travel around in other parts of the world and talk about not just the plight of the chimps, but the plight of the people too. And doing that, I was learning more and more about what we are doing to this planet. You all, I'm sure, everybody in this space knows the kind of things that we're doing. The deforestation, the desertification, the shrinking freshwater supplies, the terrible pollution of air, water, and land, the reckless burning of fossil fuels, the chemicals used in industry, in agriculture, and in our households, and how this is contaminating the soil, washed down into the rivers by the rain, is getting out into the sea. We have dead zones now in the sea. So what's happening as the forests are destroyed, they're releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. And as the forests are increasingly destroyed, there are less trees to absorb the carbon dioxide back again. And in the ocean, which is the other great ecosystem that sequesters CO2, in these dead zones, no longer can CO2 be absorbed. And the ocean in many places has reached capacity for absorbing CO2. So here we have these two great ecosystems, both highly endangered by us. And this brings me to the difference between us, chimpanzees, and other animals. Of course, there are many, but if I'm asked to pick the main one, the most significant one, it's the explosive development of the human intellect. So yes, chimpanzees are way more intelligent than we used to think. There are chimpanzees who can use touchpads and solve problems on computers. They can learn 400 or more of the signs of American Sign Language, ASL. And some of them love to paint, and they will actually sign to you what it is they've painted. And yet you can't compare even the brightest chimpanzee with a creature that's created a rocket, that's gone hundreds of thousands of miles up into space to the red planet Mars, and from that rocket crawled a little robot, which is still crawling around on the surface of the red planet, sending photographs back for us to see. It's a very big difference. If I'm asked to pick something which has pushed us in this different direction, so that our brain relative to body size is so much bigger than that of the chimpanzee, I would pick the fact that we communicate with this language, so that all humans have language, different languages, but languages for communication. And that means that we can talk about things and teach people about things that are not present. Chimpanzees can learn, but they learn from what they see. And we can learn from the distant past. We're not very good at it. We don't learn the lessons that we should learn from what we've done in the past. We can make plans for the future. I could plan to come back here in 10 years if I'm still alive. Any of you who are still alive could plan, well, yes, I'll go and hear her, see what she's learned in 10 years. We can make those plans. But most important of all, we can discuss. So that if there's a problem, we can bring together people from different walks of life, and they can sit around and try and find some solutions. And that's what's happening. So the question then is, how can the most intellectually smart, the most intellectual creature that's ever walked the planet be destroying its only home? We just have this one planet. People thought about Mars, but now we've seen those photographs coming back. It's not a very hospitable environment. I don't want to go to Mars, and I don't suppose you do. So we've just got this planet, and we're destroying it. So what's happened? And I come back again to the indigenous people and the wisdom of the indigenous people, not only the indigenous people, of course, but indigenous wisdom, where you make a decision which is based on how will the decision we jointly make today affect our people in the future? And today, more and more, particularly in this materialistic Western society, we're making decisions based on how will this help me now, me and my family now? How will this help my next job opportunity? How will this decision I make today affect my political campaign? Those are the criteria that we're using. And this, I think, along with the fact that, yes, we need money to live, but too many people are living for money. Mahatma Gandhi said the planet can produce enough for human need, but not human greed. And we have become more and more greedy. And we have developed technology which enables us to destroy faster. And we carry on destroying the planet, and we're not thinking about our great-great-grandchildren. And yet, if you talk to people individually, they love their children and their grandchildren. There's a peculiar disconnect, almost like a schizophrenia, where you love your family, you love your children, you want them to be happy and successful, and yet you're incapable of seeing that the decisions you're making are harming their future. So it's a very strange time that we're living in. And there are an awful lot of scientists who will stand up and say to you, it's too late. We're on a downward trajectory. Do I have hope? I give lectures that are about hope, planting seeds of hope, and I couldn't do that if I didn't have hope. I do think that we're reaching a point of no return, but I don't think we're there yet. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I choose to think that way. If we all lose hope, there is no hope. If we lose hope, we give up. Because what's the point of hitting our heads against the wall? I do have hope, and I have hope for different reasons. 5 of them. My first reason for hope is youth, the young people. And it's because I have felt so concerned for the number of young people I've met who have seemed to have lost hope that we started our Roots and Shoots program that you referred to. It began in Tanzania in 1991. And it was when 12 high school students came to my veranda and were telling me about everything that concerned them in their immediate environment. The fact that there was dynamite fishing, the fact that it was destroying the coral reef and the breeding grounds of the fish, the fact that there was poaching in their national parks and the government wasn't taking sufficient steps to prosecute the poachers, the fact that there were street children with no homes, the fact that there were stray dogs and nowhere for them to go, the fact that animals were being cruelly treated in the market, and more. And they wanted me to fix all these things, and I explained that it wasn't possible, and I explained that I loved Tanzania, but I wasn't Tanzanian, but they were. So these were young people of 18 to 20, and they went back to their schools. They came from 9 different schools, and they talked to their friends, and we had a big meeting, and we talked about, what do you think you could do about any of this? So we talked about some of the problems that they were concerned about, and we talked about things that they might do to help make a difference, and that's how Roots and Shoots was born. And its main message from the beginning was every single one of us makes a difference every single day, and we have a choice. Some people have little choice, but we have a choice. And if we start thinking about the consequences of our small choices and how that might affect the future, we start making change. So this was right from the beginning a central part of Roots and Shoots, the fact that every individual makes a difference and every individual has a role to play. And right from the beginning, it seemed obvious that if you were going to get together with a group of young people, you needed to understand that the problems around the planet today are interrelated. And so every group chooses projects to help people, to help other animals, to help the environment that we share. And very soon it became clear that there was a thread running through our Roots and Shoots groups that we were going to try and break down the barriers that we seem to be so good at creating between people of different cultures, people of different religions, people of different nations, and between us and the natural world. That's why I was made a messenger of peace by Kofi Annan and then re-elected by Ban Ki-moon because of Roots and Shoots, because this program that began with 12 high school students is now in 139 countries. We have members from preschool all the way through university. We even have some adult groups formed in many of these countries. We have about 150,000 groups, and a group can be a whole school, or it can be 2 children. Roots and Shoots can grow wherever it takes root. Why is it called Roots and Shoots? Imagine a big tree. I happen to love trees. I'm thinking of an oak tree. And when my oak tree starts to grow, it's from an acorn this size, and little roots will appear and the little shoot, and pick it up. It seems so small, so frail, but there is a magic, a life force so powerful in that little seed that those roots, to reach the water, can work their way through rocks and eventually push them aside, and that little shoot, to reach the sunlight, can work through cracks in a brick wall and eventually knock it down. So think of the rocks and the walls as all the problems we inflict on this planet. Socially and environmentally, it's about hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people around the world can make a difference, can break through. So, at any rate, Roots and Shoots, every year we try and create, or we're going to do this more and more, we try to create one theme that unifies our groups around the world. And one of the great things about Roots and Shoots is one young man who was there right at the beginning in 1991, and I asked him what Roots and Shoots had meant. He said, for one thing I'll never forget, my whole life was changed, my philosophy is different. And he said, but what I love is I know anywhere I go in the world, even if I know nobody, if there's a group of Roots and Shoots, I found my family. And this has been proved again and again to be true. So young people linked around the world, a growing family of youngsters who understand that, yes, we need money to live, but we mustn't live for money, which is what I said before, and I'll say it again. Young people who understand more of the problems than we ever did. Why do I carry this little person with me? Well, you can see it's a cow, and cow has a very imaginative name. She's called Cow. And Cow was given to me in Wisconsin, the dairy state, just as a little joke. You know, she had a little jacket which said, love from Wisconsin. And I was going to give her away to a child, and I thought, no, she's going to work for me. She is my spokesperson for the abused farm animals. And she not only helps me talk about the way we torture them, but she helps me explain that in order to feed these millions and millions and billions of animals, as more and more people eat more and more meat, that we cut down forests to grow grain for them. They move out grazing into the forest, turning them into woodland, turning them into desert. We feed them out this end, and gas comes out the other end, and that's methane, and that is a more virulent greenhouse gas than CO2. And, you know, if we care not about the environment but about our own health, to keep these poor creatures alive, they're fed routinely antibiotic, which have got out in the environment. The bacteria have built up resistance, and people are dying from a scratch on a finger. And it's admitted that use of antibiotics in animal agriculture is responsible for more than 50% of the misuse of antibiotics on the planet today. So that's why I have Cow, and we're talking about hope now, and young people are beginning to understand these kind of problems. There are more and more vegetarians and even vegans today than there were 10 years ago, and that's what Cow is helping in, and that's one of the ways that we can move towards a better, more environmentally, a more humane future. But then my next reason for hope is the human brain. We haven't always used it wisely, but when you think of the ways that we are creating new technology to enable us to live in greater harmony with nature, the new green energy, for example, the way we're using our brains to live our own lives in a more environmentally and socially acceptable way. And my next reason for hope is the resilience of nature. And here I want to go back to Gombe. In 1991, I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park in a small plane. When I arrived in 1960, Gombe was part of contiguous forest all the way along the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika. When I looked down from this plane, I was shocked. I knew there was some deforestation, but I simply wasn't prepared for the kind of scene that I saw. A tiny patch of oasis of forest surrounded by completely bare hills, more people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere, land terribly over-farmed because they were so desperate to try and grow something to feed themselves and their families. And that's when I realized we can't even try to save the chimpanzees while there are people living around the forest in this situation. So that gave rise to our program we call Take Care, Tukari, it's known as. And we began by going into the 12 villages around Gombe with a team of Tanzanians, not marching in an arrogant way and saying, well, you've made a right mess of your lives and this is what we're going to do to improve things for you, but going in with a team of Tanzanians who sat and listened to the elders and asked them, what can we do to make your lives better? Starting with growing more food, but in a sustainable fashion. Then they wanted better health care facilities and they wanted better education for their children. So these were the ways that we started our program in the villages. And then we moved into other things as they came to trust us. We introduced some water programs so that they got clean water, hygienic latrines, health care for mothers and children. And then we introduced microcredit, where groups of women, it was based on Mohammed Yunus, Grameen Bank. He's one of my real heroes. He took me to Bangladesh and I met the women he'd helped. And so these women take out very small loans for environmentally sustainable projects. And it's made such a difference because we've had over 88% return on the tiny loans that we've given out. And I think it's even higher than that. And when they pay back, these women are proud. The only reason they haven't paid back is when a family member gets sick or dies or something like that. We have had huge success. We provide family planning. We provide information about women's rights and children's rights. And it was so successful that we've now moved into 52 villages, all around Gombe, where the hills were bare. We are restoring forest. And down in the south, where there's still intact forest, where more chimps are actually, but they're not protected by any legislation, there we're protecting the forest by working with the villagers, by making them into our partners. And if you fly over Gombe today, you don't see bare hills. The trees are coming back. And what we introduced here, which was so very important, was high-resolution satellite mapping technology. We have a young man working for JGI, Lilian Pintea. He is cutting edge. He's managed to make connections for us with some of these companies like Google Earth, Digital Globe, NASA. And with this technology, we have been able to, or he was able to go to the villages with high-resolution maps, where the villagers who used to make their maps drawn with pieces of stick on the ground now look at these maps and they're amazed. And the woman said, that's the tree I put my baby under when I do work in the fields. That's the detail in these maps. They're required to make land use management plans, but they haven't been able to afford them. So we managed to get a grant for them to make these plans. And because they now trust us, because they're our partners, they put land aside around Gombe to form a buffer for the forest to be restored. The chimpanzees have 3 times more forest than they had 15 years ago. And down in the south, protecting the forests, up around Gombe, restoring the forests. Not much good if you're not following what's happening and ensuring that the trees don't get cut down again. So Lillian Pintea started workshops, trained volunteers from these 52 villages to be forest monitors. And thanks to Google Earth, they got iPads, Android cell phones, and they chose themselves what they would indicate if there was some kind of illegal activity going on in their forest. So it might be an illegal pit sawmill, it might be an animal trap, it might be they find a cartridge from a gun. They also record any chimpanzee or chimpanzee nest or leopard or any other animal that they think is important. And all of this information from these 52 villages is now going up to one of these strange platforms in the clouds. You know, clouds seem to mean something different today. And it's going up to something called Global Forest Watch. And it's available to everybody, so everybody can see as this information comes in. It's like, you know, citizen science from around the world. Trained people can see what's happening to our forests. People who put money into protecting a forest can now assure themselves that the forest is being protected, or if it's not, for that matter. So I think all of you have probably seen a place that we destroyed, which given time, or perhaps a little help, has once again become beautiful, where nature takes over again, and may not be quite the same, but it can still be beautiful. Animals on the very brink of extinction can be given another chance. I wrote a book on it. It's called Hope for Animals and Their World, and two of them, you know, right here in Manitoba. One is the whooping crane that flies over on its way to the breeding grounds, and the other is the black-footed ferret, which was totally extinct in the wild, and the story of how it has been restored is pretty amazing. So the next reason for hope is something I discovered last year. I suddenly realized this was a reason for hope, which was when I took part in the climate march in New York in last September, where the organizers thought there'd be perhaps maybe 80,000 people. It was actually closer to 400,000 people, because I saw it. Everybody around me had their little, you know, iPad, cell phones and pads and whatever, and they were tweeting and twittering and Facebooking, and what were they saying? I asked. Well, they were telling their friends to come. It's neat, you know, there's a whole lot of film stars here. It's nice weather. I even heard one of them say, Jane Goodall's here. Oh, yes. And this same thing happened in other major cities around the world. So it was said to be the biggest gathering of people for one issue ever in the history of the planet. So today, if we have an issue, we can reach out in a way we never could before. And I know it can be used for bad purposes. All technology can. Our brains can be used for good and bad. But we can make use of social media in a very, very positive way. And finally, the last reason for hope, the indomitable human spirit. The people who tackle something that is seemingly impossible and won't give up. And I know among the First Nation people, as you've been through this struggle for rights, to address the wrongs that were perpetrated, there have been figures like this, standing out, fighting against what at one time seemed it seemed a battle that never could be won. And there are people who are icons like Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 17 years of hard physical labor in the limestone quarry with this amazing ability to forgive. But there are people all around us who have overcome seemingly impossible problems in their lives. Sometimes it's physical disabilities, sometimes it's discrimination, sometimes it's poverty. And there are these people who are shining lights, who are inspirational in the fact that they've never given up, even in the face of adversity. Even though they may be knocked down again and again, they rise up again. They inspire those around them to follow in their footsteps. So those are my reasons for hope. And so, do I have hope for the future? Yes. Do I have hope for our species? Yes. And I particularly feel hopeful because of the way that more and more people are seeking for this message. More and more people want hope. And once you have hope, then you can do things that you wouldn't do if you didn't have hope. Then you begin to understand, yes, my life does make a difference. I do have a choice. I'm going to do my little bit. I don't care how small it is. When 20 million people all make small choices for the right environmental or social reason, you start to see change. So that's my message to all of you, that every single one of you makes a difference every single day. And we shouldn't forget it. Thank you.
All right. One more time for Dr. Goodall. Dame Goodall. That was wonderful. That was wonderful and a very touching speech as well. So we are going to have a question and answer period. So if you have a question, please find Susan. No, not Susan. Andrea, who's over there. And Jenny in the back. So if you just want to put up your hand, if you have a question that is in fact a focused question and not a soliloquy that you want to share with us, we'll find you. But we're going to begin with a question from the Fall Institute. We have a student from the Fall Institute, the class seminar series, who wants to ask a question. So can you come forward at this time?
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodall. That was really beautiful. And thank you for coming to our school to speak to us. So you spoke about breaking down the barriers between people, religion, and race. And I think that everyone here can agree we've come really far as humans in that sense, but do you think that there will be a day in the future where we look at speciesism the same way that we look at racism and homophobia?
That's what I hope. That's what I hope. I hope that we can get back to having a good relationship with our environment and with all the beings who inhabit that environment and treat them with respect. I think respect is probably one of the most important words for us. You often hear people talk about tolerance, and tolerance is I don't like that word at all. You tolerate something, it doesn't mean very much, it's very arrogant. But respect, respect is something very important. We should respect the other creatures with whom we share the planet. I mean, you can't very much love a mosquito, but you can respect the way that it's gone into that little niche and been so successful. I mean, I totally respect it.
Tailoring your message to the Manitoba audience.
Yeah, that's why I said
the mosquitoes. Is there another question there from someone in the Fall Institute, or we're... Oh, sorry, let's go to Jenny in the back.
Ms. Goodall, I just want to say first, it's a thrill to be here and hear you speak. I can remember my anthropology text with the picture of the chimp using the stick in the termite hole quite vividly. And anyways, it's a thrill to hear and see you. My question is, do you have a concern, as I do, with genetically modified foods / organisms and the way they've been on our shelves for a couple of decades? Over 80% of foods in Canada and the US have some GMO ingredient, and also the way that they are embedded with the university system, Monsanto having, I believe, offices in University of Winnipeg and integrated into the higher learning system. Do you have a concern, as I do?
I've written several chapters about this. I have a great deal of concern. I've read through all the experiments with animals, and almost every single one, animals fed genetically modified food, have suffered some kind of internal problems, sometimes quite major ones. I won't go into all of that now, but I will say that for anybody who's interested in this, I'm not an expert, but there is an expert. He's a lawyer. He's actually a public interest attorney. His name is Stephen Drucker, D-R-U-C-K-E-R, and he spent 15 years writing a book called Altered Genes and Twisted Truth. And it's just published about 4 months ago. I wrote the introduction to it, and I have been with him promoting this book in different cities around the world. This is a man who has written every single line is double-checked. It is the most damning indictment of genetically modified food that you will ever find.
For the record, Monsanto does not have offices at the University of Winnipeg.
I'm glad about that.
Putting that on the record. Okay, so I have a question over here with Andrea.
Hi, yes. It's been an honor to hear you speak. I share all of your beliefs from what I can tell. I'm wondering, what role do you think spirituality, not religion, but spirituality has to play in getting the job done?
Well, I personally, when I'm particularly out in the forest, I feel a great sense of connection with some great spiritual being. I don't know what to call that spiritual being. I was brought up as a Christian talking about God. We talk about God. There's no other name that I know of, but if I'd been born a Muslim, I'd talk about Allah and so on and so forth. But out in the forest, where everything is interconnected, I feel this so powerfully. And it's almost as though every living thing has some of this great spiritual power in it. It's the sort of life force. And because we want to name everything, we always have to give everything a name. And so that spiritual power in us we call our soul. And for me, it's very important to believe in this, that there's something greater than us. And I do believe in this great spiritual power. And I would be quite lost without that. And it would seem to me to be pointless to be here if I didn't believe in that great spiritual power. And I do think it's very important. It helps some people to fight these fights. Actually, let me add one thing to that, because when I started talking about chimpanzees in the early days, there was always questions about people say, what do they do about death, and do they grieve, and do they bury their dead? They wanted to try and make us different. And one of the last things, of course, is, do they have any kind of religion? Well, then everybody laughs if somebody asks that question. Do chimpanzees have religion? What a stupid idea. But in fact, out in the middle of the forest, there's this amazing waterfall. It drops 80 feet, and it's a thin body. It's a small stream, but over the hundreds and hundreds of years, it's come down this rock face, and it's gradually carved a channel into the rock face. So as the water falls, it displaces air, and there's always the breeze on the hottest day, and it makes a roaring sound as it drops onto the gravel rocks. And sometimes the chimpanzees, particularly the males, will, as they approach, their hair bristles a little bit with excitement, and for maybe 10 to 20 minutes, they will do these amazing displays, waterfall displays, dances you could call them, and they'll normally avoid the water, but they'll sway from foot to foot upright in the water, and they'll pick up big rocks and hurl them, and they'll climb up the vines at the side of the waterfall and push out into the spray, and at the end you can sometimes see them sitting on a rock, watching the water as it falls, watching as it goes away. If they had language to speak about this feeling of it must be something akin to wonder and awe, if they could talk to each other about it, might this not lead one of the early animistic religions, the worship of water, of sun, the things that early humans didn't understand? And so I think it's a perhaps you could call it a proto-religious or proto-spiritual display. I thought I'd add that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. I was actually wondering. So we're going to go to a question on the left side over here with Jenny.
Hi, my name is Tabitha. I was wondering what you do about stereotypes and the environment.
Can you just expand a little bit more on what you mean around that?
What do you do for stereotypes and labels for the big companies who use animal pictures for indigenous pictures in their products?
So do you have any thoughts on the way animals are represented in the corporate media or in advertising, and for better or for worse?
Well, I'm still not totally clear what you're meaning, but for example, you buy a carton of milk or you buy some butter and you see a happy cow grazing in the fields, or a silly little cartoon cow, with its tail up looking so happy, and you know perfectly well that the milk has come from most likely a cow that's been tortured. It's the whole use of animals in the media is fascinating. People are fascinated by animals, and the media is always wanting to use animals. And one of our fights has been to get chimpanzees and other animals out of circuses, out of advertising, because although they may look sweet and cute and chimps are dressed up and everybody loves them, they then want to go and get a pet chimpanzee, which is still legally possible, which it shouldn't be. And in fact, these animals who are looking so happy in circuses and so forth that always have been brutally treated, chimps taken away from their mothers at birth. And so one of our big efforts has been chimpanzees in labs, but chimpanzees also in entertainment, and chimpanzees as pets. It's very bad for the animal, and it's pretty bad for us too, because chimpanzees do not make good pets, and when they get older, they can seriously damage their owners.
The question here in the center.
Hi, yeah, just what you were mentioning about how you noticed the connection between the villages that you ended up working with and the chimpanzees in the forest. there's often a lot of conversations around poverty and the environment, and there have been a lot of accusations that those living in poverty are often responsible for destruction of the environment without people looking at the causes behind poverty, and people just blame the poor rather than trying to work with them. And how would you, or how do you help to address those stereotypes and sort of just that general question?
Well, I think I spent a bit of time talking about how there's no way we can protect the environment while people are living in poverty. If you're living in desperate poverty in a rural area, you are going to destroy the last of the environment because you have to. You've got to grow some food to feed your family. If you're very poor in an urban area, you're going to buy the cheapest food or the cheapest clothes, which probably have been made in a very environmentally unfriendly way or a very cruel way if it's animals. And so poverty is definitely a condition where you're most likely to be destructive. But on the other hand, so you've got poverty as a destructive force on one hand, and that's why we are doing our best to address poverty, whether it's out in Africa or wherever it is, through our Roots and Shoots program and through getting grants and so forth. And then on the other hand, you've got the rest of the world who have far more than they need, way far more than they need. They're living greedy and unsustainable lifestyles, maybe not even thinking about it. It's not that everybody's evil and wicked, it's just that people fall into a way of doing things, people fall into a wasteful way, and we are encouraged all the time to buy more than we need because we've got to keep up the economy. So when we had an economic crash a while back, everybody's told, buy more, buy more, buy more. So we've got into this extraordinary cycle of, it's an impossible cycle where if the country is poor, you want to spend more money to develop more destructive ways of destroying the planet. So on the one hand, there's poverty. On the other hand, there's unsustainable lifestyles. And then underlying all of it, there's human population growth.
Thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall. I'm Wapkanu. With regards, because you're the expert on chimpanzees, what do you think, if they could talk, what they would say about us human beings with the way we're treating our planet and just the overall well-being of where we're going and how self-destructive we are?
The interesting thing about chimpanzees, when you think about them, they're so like us that I'm afraid if they were at the stage where they could speak, they'd probably be doing the same as we are, because they're that kind of creature. They are quite selfish.
No, don't clap. Don't clap for that. No,
they're agreeing. So, but if some other animals who are less selfish, who seem to have a more indigenous type of community, they would say, I wish that you would all die out and leave the world to us. I don't know if any of you know a little children's book written by somebody called Bill Peets called The Wump World. You can still get it on Amazon, and it's absolutely amazing. The wumps are these adorable little animals, and gradually, because of the way we're destroying the world, they have to retreat under the ground. And then there's pictures, it shows, the forests are cut down, everything's polluted, everything's black. We humans are left. We can't live anymore, so we all go off on a spaceship to some distant planet to start all over again there, and gradually a wump dares to put his nose up above the ground, and there's a little piece of grass growing again, the resilience of nature, and it ends up, and so in the end the wumps got their beautiful world back again.
We've got time for one more question, so let's make it a good one. No, just kidding. But this will be the last question, so make it a good one.
Well, I think actually it would be a good one. Dr. Goodall, you are known worldwide as an authoritative female figure as a scientist. My question to you is, what can be done to get more girls engaged in the scientific community?
I think that one of the problems is that science has a reputation of being coldly objective. And I think a lot of girls don't like that. I mean, I wouldn't have done. I would never have gone into science if I'd known what it was like. I was just pushed into it by Louis Leakey. But, you know, I was criticized for talking about the chimpanzees and being anthropomorphic. I wasn't being anthropomorphic at all. I was describing what actually is true, that they do have emotions, that they do have minds capable of solving problems, that they, to some extent, can plan for the immediate future, that they show love, that they can show true altruism, compassion, as well as the nastier bits of human nature. And then I was criticized because when you're watching some interaction, you mustn't be empathetic, you mustn't become involved with your subjects. That's why you number them, you don't give them names. And so I completely resented that, because I think, you know, I watched chimpanzees, I watched a mother, she had a baby that had been wounded, she didn't understand. Every time she cradled the baby, she hurt the broken arm and the baby screamed, so she cradled even more. And I had tears streaming down my face, but if you read what I wrote, it was totally objective. It's just a little bit of discipline. You can be emotionally involved, and you should be. You actually should be, because if you're not, you lose, you know. So I think there's a lot of movements now to get girls more interested in science. And I think it's when you move away from this cold objectivity, which is so distasteful, that you'll start getting girls more involved, because actually girls who are educated in the right way are very, very interested in some aspects of science.
So if you could just hang on for 1 second, we have one additional honor we want to do with you. This is off script, but can all the female scientists in the crowd please stand up and give us a wave? Very cool. I like that. So we're going to ask one of those female scientists to keep standing. Dr. Annette Trimby is going to come up and make a special presentation and a few remarks about what we heard from Dr. Goodall. So please welcome Dr. Annette Trimby to the stage.
Well, good evening, and it's my honor to say a couple of things and thank a few people. Those of you who know me know I will be brief. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like I've been sitting at a kitchen table with Dr. Jane Goodall in a very intimate fashion, which is kind of amazing, given we're in a gymnasium with red and gray seats. So, and again, I don't know how you're feeling, I don't know what you're thinking, but you have an amazing ability to connect with people, Dr. Goodall. Just absolutely amazing. And we're all going to remember certain things, but one of the things that touched me deeply is, as you went through your life, you talked about your mother, you talked about your mentors, and you talked about memorable moments, life-altering moments, when you think about why you're here and what you want to do. So as a university president, what I love about my job is part of what we do in a public university is create forums like this, where we bring in incredible people like Dr. Goodall. Let's face it, she's got to be in the top 1 percentile of mankind, womankind. And she's right here at UW. And she's taught us you can learn from everyone. You can learn from your dog and trust in what you see. And I'm all for growing a few next genes, and I'm all for a new version of science called girl science. And it's science with heart, science with mind, and I guess that's Indigenous science as well. So I'm very, very inspired tonight. I want to thank Dr. Goodall. I want to thank JGI, the people she brought with her. Carlos, you've been phenomenal. Wob, we're so fortunate to have such a talented young leader that's really going to make a difference in our country. Our events staff, our volunteers, this is our community, Jane. It's a wonderful, wonderful, generous, warm community. Winnipeg, my home, my province. So I get to give you a gift now, and it's very, very special, so special, I gotta look for it. But we need to hear another story from our friend Wob, who will tell you a little bit about the gift, because it's very, very special.
Can I look at it?
You need to look at it, and you need to wave it, and maybe the camera will show it. I'll take the paper for you.
So this is a birch bark biting created by an artist named Pat Berderer, who is originally from Churchill, Manitoba. She is Cree, and she is a living practitioner of this traditional art form. So you often hear that Indigenous people have an oral tradition, but that's not entirely correct. We also have a recorded tradition as well. And the recorded tradition was documented on birch bark, either through this style, which is the biting, so it's done using the teeth, or the more historic recordings were done using engravings on the birch bark. But one of the things about birch bark is that in Indigenous cultures, it's also like the duct tape. So in addition to being the paper, it's the fire starter, it's the stuff that we made canoes out of, and we even create some of the dyes to create to color our clothing and bagging, or luggage rather, bagging. See what happens when I try and get eloquent, you know? So it has 1,001 different uses, but probably the most significant use is as a medium for transmitting history and transmitting representations of our culture. So we want to honor you with that.